Hello, I'm
Hello.
Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you to On the Real Side. We're beginning our tribute to the great Ira Sullivan, who was a very, very important person in my life and in the lives of many of the people that we're going to be talking to. Um, Ira left us. He ascended in 2020, and he's very sorely missed by everybody that knew him. He touched everybody's life. He changed us all in some way or another. Just knowing Ira was a blessing. And today, my first guest, to really start this podcast off, I thought it only appropriate that the first person and people that I talked to would be his wife of many years. She'll tell us how many. I lost track at 60 something, but Charlene Sullivan, who and is here with Ira's office. You'll see next to her is what kind of pants do you call these? Cargo pants. His cargo pants, which
They were supposed to be cargo pants,
But these are his go-to dress pants.
but they're dress pants.
his dress pants. He could have had his cargo pants, but they've kind of been well.
I think they were worn, yeah, too worn to keep.
They were worn to keep. And we have his daughter, who was not feeling so well, and but she's here. You will see her hands. His daughter, who was known as Sunny Sullivan, and I knew as a little girl as Leslie as well.
Uh-oh.
And we're here, well, from the person who knew Ira from the beginning. Really, when did you? We might as well start at the beginning. When and how did you guys meet? Were you in high school together, or junior high, or?
No, he was out of high school. We were introduced by his father, who was a restaurateur. And I think he wanted to keep Ira at home. So when I came in to collect into the restaurant to collect my brother's paycheck, my brother was in hospital in traction after a motorcycle accident. I apologized politely to him, for interrupting his work there. And he said, "Oh no, I have my son here." However, he's a musician.
What was he doing in the hospital?
What?
What was Ira's father doing there?
He was a restaurateur. He was managing this restaurant. Yeah, very new restaurant in a new suburb called Park Forest in Illinois, south of Chicago. It was like Levittown in New York after the war.
Okay.
And a very nice place. And Ira was a city boy and didn't want to be there. But when my brother got in the accident, Ira came out and took over. And his dad introduced us because I said, "Oh, I love music." And he said, "Really?" And he said, "Would you like to meet him?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Take a booth, have some coffee, and I'll find out where he is." And I sat there for a while watching Saturday morning traffic. I hadn't seen anybody on the walk over there to the mall, but there they all were looking for breakfast and so on. And suddenly this tall persona stepped up to the table and said, "Hello, I'm Ira." And I said, "Iron?" And he said, "No, Ira." And I said, "Iris?" And I didn't get his name. He must have said it 4 times or maybe more. Finally, he got a little irritated and said, "No, Ira, I-R-A." And then he brightened up and he sat down and said, "And you are?" And that we went from there. Of course, he asked me if I played anything, and I said, "No, but I do sing. And I just like music." And then he asked a very strange question. He said, "Would you like to hear me play?"
I thought that
I
might be
thought,
coming. I thought that might be coming next, just as that might be a standard way that we do. Tend
yeah, you know.
to, but,
I mean, I didn't know if it was an audition or a date,
I
and
see.
and who was being auditioned, he or me.
Either both. Yeah, but the two-way audition. Yes, that's.
Ultimately, the next week I went out to hear him. He came by, picked me up in a taxi, met my parents, and took me to this little pizza place in the Chicago Heights where I got to hear him play, and it was stunning. It really stunned me.
How old were you and Ira at the time? Are you the same age? Were you?
No, I was 17. I was a very naive 17, and he was a man already. He was 19, I think 20 in a couple of days. It's not very far apart, but at that age, it seems like it's pretty far.
Yes, that's true.
So
So you went to hear him play, and you started to spend time together. I imagine.
his parents were there, and also the crew from the restaurant, and I got to sing. He asked me if I'd like to sing, so I sang his mother's favorite song because
Which
she was there. And
what was his
then,
mother's favorite song, by the way?
what?
What was his mother's favorite song?
September song.
Oh,
So then we ultimately went to the other side of the restaurant, left them behind, and he said the strangest thing. He said, how did he put it? He said, if you'd like to know me as I'd like to know you, you can tell all your other boyfriends goodbye. And I thought that was very forward, which it was really.
yeah. Well,
I wasn't really seeing anybody then because we just moved out to this new place. But then I didn't turn him down. He was a very strange fellow. And I felt like there was something about him that was kind of dangerous. But I didn't turn down the next date. So we went out on another date after that.
well,
It
Ira
wasn't so bad. It turned out he wasn't so bad.
turned out he wasn't so bad. Well, that must have been the case, But I mean, Ira did have this kind of self-assurance that was still humble. It was a strange combination
It was, yeah.
of complete self-assurance, but yet humility, just on the off off chance.
Well, I don't know. His mother told him one day that he had flunked humility.
Humility. Yeah, there was a. Well, I think I was watching Nikki Yarling did this little tribute to Ira, a love letter to Ira Sullivan, which I'm sure you've seen. And what Ira said in it, which I think explains his confidence, at least musical confidence, was he talked about his father, him wanting to play the trumpet or wanting to even just open the case and see what was in it, and he was very curious. And then when his father showed him a C scale, and Ira said, well, then I never needed to study after that because I don't need to learn music. I am music.
Yeah, he is music.
And so I think that attitude might have kind of fell into life as well. I mean, I'll learn life as I go along because
Right.
I am the essence of life,
Right.
and the confidence that he exuded, which sometimes got misinterpreted as brashness. And there were people that mentioned that about him, that there's a negative impressions that people get of all of us. But that confidence was definitely an essential part of him. So you started to hang out. You came to more of his gigs, and that led
He
to.
did. I hung out with him quite well. We were really tight for a while. He was very loving and giving, and he wanted me to know about bop, especially because I knew jazz. My dad was a jazz fan, and He even liked Ira. Well, he liked Ira's music. And then, well, we'd go to clubs, and I'd meet all his friends, and my life really opened up into new phases. But it was all very difficult to understand at first. He liked Dostoevsky and modern poets, and some fella whose name was Camus with a silent S on the end of it, and Kenneth Patchen. And all I had done was learn If by Rudyard Kipling and nursery rhymes. I'd been on the radio when I was a little girl singing nursery rhymes. And it was all very new to me, and I just couldn't get it at first. Eventually, I guess after a couple of years, maybe 3 years, 2.5 years, we split up, and we didn't get back together until I saw him at Cagino's on the south side of Chicago. And he was walking the bar. I believe a couple of other top drawer musicians also did that in their youth.
We have to explain that.
Very good at it. He was very good at it.
Tenor players, especially, would walk up and down the bar as they played often the rhythm and blues type of hits of the day. And, it was something that was a natural part of becoming mostly saxophone players. I never heard of trumpet players walking the bar.
I never saw any.
I never saw any. It was tenor players as a rule.
Yeah.
That was it.
Because they could look down.
Because they could look down and see what they had to step over, right?
Trumpet players to keep their instrument up.
It was amazing how people would put out their arms or cigarettes or something, as an obstacle for him to
Really?
get over. Oh yeah,
I didn't.
it was strange.
Yeah, I never saw that. That's right before my generation. So I know people like Coltrane did it, and James Moody, all these cats would
Right.
tell me they walked the bar. And that's people would actually do that. They get in their way with cigarettes, and I had no idea of that.
Yeah, occasionally, they were all in the mood, and that mood, they were all in that funky mood, and they were free and easy, so anything could happen. So
So here we are. This is better.
we were at Cagino's, I believe.
Cadino's, right? And you haven't seen each other for about 3 years.
No, we hadn't seen each other for about a year, maybe a half a year.
Half a year, okay.
So immediately he became, I was with a date. He immediately became very possessive and sat down next to me and resumed his relationship with me right away. And my date was out the window, so to speak. And then we moved on to intimacy and marriage. And here we are, having many, many years together.
How many years was it?
Well, don't ask me to count. We married in 1955, and he passed in 2020.
Right, he was already. Yeah, that's
A great guy,
65 years.
a great husband. Interesting, interesting and challenging.
Yeah, and I think that you join perhaps a handful, let me give him the benefit of the doubt, 2 handfuls of wives of jazz musicians that could actually say those 5 words. He was a great husband. There are a few out there. There are. I may be underestimating. What's that?
I'm glad of that there's some.
Yeah, but there are some.
I wonder if they all had lives of their own, because that's what it takes. You have to have your own interests because they're absent so much.
Right, and you have this wonderful talents, these talents as an artist, as a painter. I interviewed my sister yesterday, and she said, Charlene is like Rembrandt. She's
Oh wow!
gifted, but she's so gifted. And behind us, we're seeing part of a mural. Is this your work? This is.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's a painting I did of
One night
South
stands.
Florida musician.
You move the computer. Yeah, but you move the. I'm trying to get the picture in for you. The
There's no
painting.
Yeah,
light
we
on it.
see the picture. That's good. We see the close-up. That's good. And this is this was kind of funny because I know you did all these South Florida musicians and everything in this beautiful painting of the Florida nightlife, and and you didn't put me in it, but I love you anyway.
You didn't play at that club.
No, I didn't play at that club. Was that one night stands or?
Yes.
I heard about it, but that's true. I was already years gone from Florida. That's true. You know, I think of journeying with Ira. That, you know, a trip on the bandstand, set on the bandstand,
Yeah.
was this trip we took together. You know, and it would, you know, my sister Joy put it. She said, yeah, and then remember he'd make those waterfalls, and you know there'd be the sky and the waterfalls and certain cascades of notes that he would play.
Oh yeah.
Always reminded her of waterfalls. All of a sudden, it was like there were endless ideas flowing like water.
Yeah.
From him, you know, and I tried to pick up as much as I could of that through osmosis, as did a lot of us. And you know, but that's what he gave us, this flow. Everything Ira did flowed.
Yeah.
It was a flowing quality, I found. And that's why he didn't like the recording studio too, I think, because it's hard to get a flow in the recording studio.
Right.
All of a sudden the environment is such that you're being focused in on, and it's hard to, like he would say, get loose and flow. You know, so, and occasionally he did win in the studio, but that was, you know, not his favorite situation, I think, because it inhibited the flow, and he was all about the flow.
All our cassette tapes, he did a lot of flowing on the cassette tapes, because those were candid.
Right, yes, if you yeah, brought a tape to the gig, and he didn't want to see it if you were taping too. That would inhibit him sometimes. He just didn't even want to see a tape recorder
Oh, he
around.
said when he was asked which album was his favorite, he said the next one.
Right, that was.
There was a fellow down here who did for his school treatise. I forget what they call those things.
His doctoral.
The doctoral. He did
Thesis.
a huge production on the creation of creative production of Ira Sullivan. I think he called it. Peter Brewer was his name. Process. And it was a big, thick book when he got through with it, that he had transposed or transcribed several tunes that Ira had recorded. And when he had trouble getting Ira to cooperate, but he did get a little interview from him. And when it was finished, he gave it to Ira, and Ira brought it home and showed us and said, look what Peter did. And then he handed it to me, and then he walked away, you know, and I put it where I keep his treasures, or kept his treasures. And he was like a king. He gave it to me like a king, and I'm supposed to give it back to him if he ever became interested. He wasn't interested in it, but that's the way he was. He just, when he got through with that interview that Nicky did for his 89th birthday, he said, I'm surprised all these fellows were so impressed with me. It was just a gig, you know, and so he just lived. He lived for the moment. He didn't have any time sense, you know, other than rhythm.
This is Bob Mover, and we'd like to welcome you. And I'm very happy to be talking to a wonderful pianist and vibroharpist by the name of Stu Katz, who is from Chicago, Illinois, and has many memories of, you know, the heyday of Chicago, which I've always been fascinated by, being a New Yorker, but knowing a lot of cats that spent time in Chicago, and especially Ira Sullivan, who goes back with Stu many years when they were, well, Stu will tell you about that. So among many things, I'm going to talk to Stu, we're going to do our own podcast focusing on Stu's life and work. Today, though, we're focusing on the life and career of his friend and my friend, the great Ira Sullivan. And but we were talking about, to start with, we were talking about Sandy Moss. Sandy Moss was how you pronounce it, right?
Right.
And Sandy was a very underrated tenor player out of Chicago. He was sort of like, I was mentioning, like a Chicago Al Cohn. And that's what Stu said, that Al was his man, you know. And first of all, I'd like to say hello, Stu.
Hi, Bob.
It's a
It's
pleasure.
a miracle we didn't know each other for years.
It is. It's funny, but I feel like, you know, we should have. Well, we do now. We have the chance now. And that's been a good thing about this podcast. A lot of cats that even I played with, who I never really got to know other than the bandstand even. Like, I had a long talk with Lou Tabakan a couple of weeks ago, and I've known Lou since I was 16 years old, and he was in his late 20s, and we used to sit in with Zoot and Al together at the old half note. And I've run into him over the years, but we've never really sat down and talked to each other. So this has been a wonderful thing to be able to do with people. And, you know, one does have a bit of a regret that we didn't know each other, you know, when we were a little bit more spry. But, you know,
If I may, Bob, can I tell you how I got interested in jazz? Because it's interesting.
sure.
When I was 5 years old, my parents moved into a 3-story court building on Winthrop Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. And my downstairs neighbor, no relation, 10 years older than I, was a bebop trumpet player named Hotsy Katz. Did you ever hear that name?
No, I can't say I have.
Well, that's a new one on you. Howard Hotsy Katz.
Howard Hotsy Katz.
And with the windows open, he used to play Bird and Diz records. Now, remember, I'm 5 years old. I go down and knock at his door. I say, can I come in and listen to the music you're playing? And we formed a strange friendship for a high school kid and a kindergartner. But walking distance from my house was Argyle Street. And there was the Argyle Show Lounge where Charlie Parker, Miles Davis played,
I've
the
heard of it.
Dubonnet, the Tailspin, the Hourglass, all had live bebop at the time. So it was inevitable that I'd be hooked into jazz. And that's my beginnings.
Wow, that was so around 5 years old. You were you were listening there, but of course you couldn't yet go to the clubs, but you could a couple of years
I
later.
could stand outside
And you did.
and did all of them. And I was in heaven. I never knew such music existed.
Oh wow, I can only imagine.
And I was an ear piano player at the age of 3, never studied. So to me, it just felt natural.
Yeah, I kind of did that too. My parents made the mistake of giving me piano lessons because I would take things off of the radio, or if I heard music, I would go and play it in the key of C, and you know, play one note at a time, single notes. And they took me to see a movie called Can Can, and I came back and I played "You Do Something to Me." It was in my head, and I went to the piano, and I don't think it's in the key of C in the movie, but somehow I put it in the key of C and played it. So they said, "Oh, he's talented. Let's give him lessons." And I didn't respond to lessons. I wanted to go out and play ball, or you know, or just I listened to music and sang with all kinds of records and everything, but I didn't respond to the discipline of piano lessons, which I wish I had now, you know. But
I'm happy you went to saxophone for selfish reasons.
oh, thanks. Yeah, well, that was another thing, you know. But yeah, that's wild. So you heard that. So now, talking about Ira, you guys met. how old were you, and what was the meeting with Ira like? You told me a little bit about
Okay.
that the other day.
I was already going out and listening to jazz as a teenager in places they'd let me in. So I went to a small club on the north side of Chicago called the French Poodle.
The French Poodle, I heard about that.
And Ira was one of the bands there. And Wilbur Campbell would be the drummer most of the time. Jim Atlas would be the bass player. Jody Christian would probably be the piano player. And I heard this guy one day and I said, I'm going to follow him around the rest of my life. So I started going to Joe Siegel's sessions.
That
And
was
as I say, I was
Everybody
17,
can't follow that.
and I've been hooked into Ira since the age of 17. You know the feeling.
I do. It happened to me at 13. That
You were precocious. What can I do?
well, somewhat, but I just there was nothing in Miami but Ira, and it was fine. I didn't miss anything else. But you were there with like a real smorgasbord of bebop, in Chicago, which probably had more of it, more than I would even say than New York, at least as much. And
Absolutely.
and Ira stood out even in that environment, which gives you an idea how great he was, because you were dealing. I mean, at some point we should talk when we do part 2 with you, and do your own biography and do our own little.
I'd like to do that.
You know,
I think for people that are listening to this podcast that may only know Ira by you and me discussing him with such reverence, that Ira Sullivan was a multi-instrumentalist, primarily brass and reeds, could play them all with equal facility. Not many people like that. Benny Carter, maybe.
yeah, then he was.
But Ira was magnificent. He was a master. And he could also play piano and drums.
He could play piano. It was funny, in much of the way Chet Baker played piano, they played it almost like it was vibes. They play one note at a time. But as far as playing chord changes, Ira didn't do that.
Unless he wrote the song.
Yeah, and he didn't write many songs.
No.
And, when he did, it was, and I didn't really hear him play piano, but he would come to my house, and sometimes he would goof around, and he would sit at the piano and doodle, and he would come up with something that really sounded good. He'd play something in the left hand. But, if you said, Ira, let's play Easy to Love, and I was going to play my alto, and I said, you play piano, he wasn't going to do that. If I played piano, of course, he'd play all over the place. But, and drums, he was a fine drummer.
Yes, he was.
And he played good vibes as well.
He did that when I worked with him.
Yeah, when I was a kid sitting in with him at the Rancher, Eddie Cressetti was our drummer, was Ira's drummer for a while, and Eddie also played vibes. So sometimes the last set, Ira might play vibes and Eddie would play drums, or sometimes Eddie would play vibes, Ira would play drums, and Joe DiOrio was the other person in the front line, and then I would play. And Ira liked to play like Cherokee, up-tempo. He would throw those things on me, and I was like 16, and just, doing my best to keep up and not step on myself completely. And but he was ding, 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 ding. Tempos were perfect, and energy, and probably as one of the better drummers in Miami. And that was typical. But he couldn't play string instruments. Ira told me that. He said, the only thing, he said, string instruments baffle me. I remember him telling me that. He said, I could, anything. He said, but strings, I don't know how they work.
Well, I don't ever remember him playing any, so that's consistent.
Yeah, So the first time you got to play with him, you'd been listening to him for a while. Do you remember the first time you actually got to play with Ira?
He probably let me sit in. Either he or Joe Siegel let me sit in. I started out as a vibes player. And the reason I did is because there were so many great Chicago piano players already on the scene. There was Andrew Hill and Jody Christian, Eric Kaiser. I don't know if all these names ring a
I've
bell.
heard about Eric Kaiser, but I didn't know him.
But I'm skipping many. Eddie Higgins. There were just a huge, deep bench of pianists. So I decided I need to be more distinguished than that. So I bought a small set of portable vibes, and I started bringing them into Joe's sessions and sitting in. And that's where Ira heard me play vibes. He did not know I could play piano.
I see. And there were another couple of Chicago piano players that I was curious about. One was a guy named Billy Wallace.
Wonderful. He was Milwaukee, I think, originally.
Is that where he was? Because I heard him. And there was, of course, Chris Anderson was around too, right?
Spectacular, yes.
I got to play with Chris quite sometimes in New York. I had a very good time with Chris and learned a lot with him. And there's somebody else who I'm going to think of who was also a very good Chicago piano player. But I know what you mean. So you started to play vibes, and Ira knew you as a vibes player.
And he allowed me to sit in with him. And after a while, Joe Siegel started hiring me to play with Ira, and Ira was fine with that. And not only that, Ira, when my eldest son, who's now 64, was a baby, Ira and his wife and daughter, Sonny, then known as Leslie,
I remember that.
moved one block from us on the south side of Chicago. So Ira and his wife and my wife and I became social friends as well. It was lovely.
Oh, that's nice. So you were neighbors, really, and your kids were kind of growing up together too.
They weren't friends, but they knew each other. I have photographs of the two of them together.
Yeah, that's and
over the years, I worked. The main jobs I worked with Ira were Joe Siegel venues. At first, Joe didn't have a permanent home. It was a traveling show.
mm-hmm.
And wherever he would work, he'd hire Ira and me. And he has a traditional August is Charlie Parker month ever since Bird died in 55. And I've been working almost all of them. Been working them since the late 50s.
Yeah, well, I know there's a wonderful, maybe my favorite record of Ira in a lot of ways is the Bird Lives record.
Oh, it's great.
I recorded at a Charlie Parker Memorial, and I think it was what was called the Chicago Jazz Quintet, Ira Sullivan Chicago Jazz Quintet with Jody Christian on piano, the great Nicky Hill on tenor. Yep. I want to ask you a little bit about him too in a minute. And and two drummers, Dorell Anderson and Wilbur Campbell were the two drummers that alternated. And Donald Garrett.
Yeah, also known as Raphael.
Also known as Raphael Donald Garrett, who also played in the more avant-garde group of Coltrane after Jimmy Garrison left.
Yeah, very, very gifted human being.
Yeah, I mean,
and a little twisted.
Yeah, what it seems. Well, a lot of cats got twisted. What was his particular twist?
It may have been drugs. I was never into the drug scene at all because I had a parallel life as a lawyer, which I worked at all my adult life because I got married early and had kids. And it was important to me to not be scuffling financially. And I managed both lives. I think it took away from my ability to have had more widespread notoriety as a musician, but it was okay. I very lucky that I had two careers that I love.
We're sitting here, we're talking with wonderful violinist and vocalist and educator and administrator, Nicole Yarling. We know her. I know her as Nikki, and she knows me as Bobby, because that's how long we've known each other. And we're discussing, we're continuing our praise and of the great Ira Sullivan. And we were just saying that and Nicole has made a film herself about Ira that's just wonderful, called A Love Letter to Ira Sullivan. And there is one scene in it where Ira's talking. She has quite a nice footage. That's such nice footage of Ira. By the way, hello, Nicole. How you doing?
Hi.
And you know, but it was a wonderful, wonderful film. And she has beautiful talking Ira footage of Ira talking himself about music. And there's one thing that struck me in it as particularly profound, where Ira talks about never having formally studied music. He said he saw the trumpet in his house. He asked his dad, he got it out from behind the couch, can you show me something about this? And he said his father showed him a C scale on the trumpet. And Ira said, and then I took it from there. And he did. And then he said, well, I didn't. People said, you mean you didn't study music? You didn't learn music? He said, well, you know, you learn always. But no, I didn't study music. I thought, why should I study music when I am music?
No, and it's the truth. And this was what I was going to say to you. I tell my students this all the time, and I think this way. The instrument, no matter what it is the vehicle. The music comes from you. It comes from your heart and your soul and your head and your experiences. That's what it is. So all you're doing is transferring what you know to your horn, whatever your respective horn is. And because Ira can pick up anything and start playing and make incredible music. And that, you know, that record, what's the record? I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. May have actually included it in the little documentary, where he goes through and plays several horns. I'll have to think of the name of the record.
There's one that he has Duffy, he has Hank Jones on it, and I think it's called like Ira Sullivan Plays Everything.
I don't know if it was that, but he goes through and he's playing, literally, he plays every horn. And then he took a horn off the wall.
There's a blues, I know what you mean.
Yes.
On his first record,
is it
Johnny
B?
Griffin and Wilbur
Blues
Campbell.
in B.
Blues in B. The one title. It's actually in B flat, by the way. You know, I mean, as great as he was, that was all those instruments. The key of B would be a bitch, but he probably could have done that too. But he took a peck horn off the wall. Remember, there was something that was lying around the studio, and he plays baritone on it. And it's the one and only time he ever recorded on baritone. And he plays one of the most beautiful versions of My Old Flame you could ever hear on it. Plus, you know.
Yeah, that's because he could. He did it because he could. That sounds silly, but it's the truth.
That's a perfect answer to it. That's how he could do it. He just, the funny thing is, he did tell me he could do that with anything but strings. He really was baffled by string instruments. He said that. Yeah. He said, I can't figure out how they work. We were talking about that. And piano.
Yeah, he had that group.
And piano as well. He could play one note at a time on the piano, but because he didn't like and he could sit down at the piano and play some music that he would make up, but he didn't really understand technically what chord changes were enough to sit down and play them on the piano the way Coltrane or Sonny Rollins or Phil Woods or Miles could, you know, actually play.
But he didn't really need to, because everything, that's what I'm saying, his weapon of choice were the horns.
Yeah.
And I think, goodness, that he didn't, because we had strings attached for years, which was a string quartet and a jazz quartet. played together, you know. And so he would scare the bejesus out of the string players because all of them except me were really like classical players. And so I remember there was a gig we did, and it was outside, and he took the music away, the written music away from all the string players, and they were. I was okay. They were freaking out, you know, because he got, and that, I mean, that's one thing that I cherish that I got from him and musicians like him. Learned music, to me, one of the best ways of learning music. Yes, learning to read music. Yes, formally learning the training is great, but really understanding and getting inside of the mechanics of what the sound is. He did that. He didn't need to go to school to do that. He sat down and listened to records and played with people and figured out stuff on his horn or on any one of the horns he played. And
Well,
that,
in playing with him, I made a little independent study in my learning. When I was a kid, when I first met Ira, and from the ages of 13 when I started to play, till I was about 15 when Phil Woods heard me, and I was only playing by ear, but he heard me in this little high school all-star band that Alan Rock had put together. But I was determined not to learn changes because I wanted to be like Ira, and Ira didn't know, and I was going to learn the same way. And it turned out to be a wonderful foundation because I did play like that until I went off to camp, one of the very first jazz camps. And Phil Wood said, you play the piano anyway. I said, yeah, I sit down at the piano and I do things, I mean, I guess I could even hear something on the radio and play the chords. I didn't know what the names were, but I could do it. And I was like totally intuitive. But, Phil said, well, look, it's good if you know what you're doing. And here's what you can do if you know. So I was there to learn, and I did learn, and I practiced it a lot and learned. And so I became rather schooled, but though I quit high school, I never went to any colleges except I lived on college campuses and hung out and audited every class I thought was useful, but that's another story. But the main thing I'm saying is that through, that when I finally learned what I was doing, then I noticed that people, for instance, 4 people that really impressed me that, quote, didn't know technical music were Ira, Zoot Sims, Chet Baker, and Stan Getz. They really didn't know, but I'd say, well, wait a minute, they've got to know something. What do they know? How do they hear? And so now that I know what I'm doing, let me learn to play like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and understand that.
yeah. I mean, if you think about it and really think about this, most of the world, I mean, other than Western classical music, most cultures, like they play folk music or whatever their music is of their country, it's oral. It's the oral tradition. It's this. They learn folk songs and they learn their instruments. Yes, there's formal training, but a lot of the music they learn by doing this. And I think nowadays, and sorry, I have to be honest, the university training, they tell you to learn this, but it's more this and this than it is because music, in some people that we're talking about right now, were more lyrical, more individual sounding. They developed their own voice, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the playing is almost mathematical or scientific.
It's amazing how many students I get that I would ask. In other words, like when you ask somebody like Ira, Sonny Rollins told me he didn't really know what he was doing until about 1955. He started to study formally. Other than that, he would go over to Bud's house and Monk's house and learn stuff there, but not by name. He'd just hear the sound and try to play the voicing they played and on the horn, and do these kind of things. But the amount of people that now I say, listen, have you ever sung along with the record? I was singing along with records before I even played the saxophone. I could, and it was just a natural thing for us to do. And you know, it's Benny Green had a funny line because it's almost true. I, when you tell somebody, the famous thing was you got to get away from the paper. That's what you would tell people for years. It was like, I'm in the classical training and they want to play solos, but they're reading it and they're writing out transcriptions.
Mm-hmm.
And Benny says it's gone to a new level now. You tell somebody, get away from the paper. You don't need things in front of you, like you open the changes, the real book or this and that. Get away from the paper. They'll turn to you and they'll say, what's paper?
It's the truth. My God, you got to get away from the computer.
Get away from your telephone. You know, you open it, you go to a jam session with young kids and they all got their phones and changes are on the phone.
Scream at them. Like,
And we used to say phoning it in, but it meant something entirely different. Remember, like we were, you know, just discussing it. And the thing was, Ira being this kind of intuitive musical mind, it wasn't, and also the learning of tunes. You know, like Ira and Sonny Rollins both said to me, well, we're tunesmiths. That's what we are. We're tunesmiths. There's a lot of people that are musicians, but not everybody who's a musician is a tunesmith. Is someone, which is something I've quoted often. Dave Frishberg said the same thing, that many people just go into music so they can play an instrument. And then there are people who go into music to play songs. And the instrument is a vehicle with which to play the song. But, you know, there was a soulfulness that Ira was like sort of the end of this great generation, you know, like through bebop. There was still an intuitiveness about the music, and a lot of it was based on friendship and who you hung out with, and you know, and that was some of the reason even that there was so much the drug community at one point, that you know, it was sort of like being blood brothers. Somebody described it to me once as being, you know, you just had this kind of, and you'd share a state of mind. The drug would put you all in a similar state of purpose, and then you go and play the music with that extra added
yeah, that was
added incentive, we might say, you know.
right.
And then cats started realizing that, you know, the ones that did not, most people lived, some did not, but you know, like Walter Davis Jr. told me once, that he learned to take the feeling that he got from getting high and do it through almost a meditative state, where he could do it without getting high, but kept the state of mind. So, you know, it's a paradox. As you wonder if, having had that state of mind, you helps you know what to strive for without using the enticement or inducement of the drug, you know.
Okay.
Just
Because I was going to say, you mentioned Warren Marsh, and I thought about Lenny Tristano. That was a whole nother school of thought.
that was another aspect of that language.
Yeah.
It certainly was related to bebop in the sense that swing was an inspiration for both of those things. But it was more jumping off from Lester Young, you know, in that way. But that's another thing, because well, you know, that was part of it too. Like in my own way, the values that Ira had were definitely not Tristano-like. But I was into playing counterpoint a little bit more, and so was Joe DiOrio. And Joe and I started to play more counterpoint, and then Ira started to play to say, oh, this can be more fun, because he didn't really have a background. That was not part of the Chicago way of people played solos, and you played strong solos, and you did this, but the idea of playing two lines together and this kind of thing was not often a part of that music, you know. So
well, and you had Von Friedman too in Chicago. You had Von Friedman, that whole scene of it was almost like the free stuff in Chicago. And
right, the free stuff, but on changes, you know, the idea of playing a tune and playing counterpoint over it for a couple of choruses, that I rarely heard that, you know. I mean, at least in recorded. I'm sure cats were experimenting with it because they were playing music every which way in Chicago, you know. That was, but you know, so I think I had an interest in counterpoint a little later that might have come from Joe and myself, you know, like just being because. But when I started to play to get into like Lee Konitz to play a little bit like that, Ira didn't really like that. You know, he lived with me doing it, and when I played with him, I didn't play that way. But when he'd hear that, and to me it was a wonderful challenge to say, well, like part of being a musician and trying to create your own way of playing is how do I put my influence from Bird, of course, but Lenny Tristano, Lee Konitz, and Warren Marsh, and Roland Kirk, and Ira, how do they all, and Gene Ammons, how do they all fit together in me? And so that was,
But see, that's what I like. That's what I like. They were all like really individual sounds. And when you heard them, you knew it was them. And that's what makes it really cool to me. I mean, sort of all the same vocabulary. You could, you split hairs, but they had something to say, and everybody said it slightly differently. And I thought that that's what made it cool, because then when you hear Sonny Rollins play, you knew it was Sonny Rollins,
yeah,
and he always sounded like, I mean, he played early on, of course, he sounded like, he was playing the literal vocabulary. And then later on, it sounded like he was searching for stuff. And that's what, to me, made it kind of cool.
but
Um,
so some people said that Ira. You see, I thought Ira sounded like Ira. I could always tell him, on all of his instruments, but his influences were very, very apparent. Like, I mean, he had, you would hear, and he would go from one. It was like he would go into the style of someone, and then come out. It would come out his, but he might start out, and he sounded like Benny Golson on tenor for a minute. He'd be, and the first few bars you're there, and then he'd kind of find Ira in the middle of the solo. He'd find his own thing, but he'd start out sometimes with Sonny Rollins and go to Ira, or he'd start out with Miles with the harmon mute, or he'd start out like Booker Little or Clifford Brown, and then you'd hear the Ira-ness of it. But if you didn't really listen, some people said, well, he just imitates different people on different things. And I said, well, no, it's not imitation, it's emulation, because through emulation, he finds himself, in there. But
well, I agree with you 100%. I mean,
yeah, there's a difference. And
and
tell me a little bit about your life with Ira. Like your own story with Ira,
oh,
when you
uh,
met him and how this all.
well, it's funny because I was in New York. I met John, my ex, and he, and actually Simon Sauls.
Right,
Uh,
Simon was a wonderful guitar player that we had that also wrote some beautiful tunes, and um, Ira took Simon under his wing,
mhm.
and they became very close friends. The other thing interesting about Simon was he was an observant Jew, and he didn't work on Shabbos. But did you know that he he
Yeah,
found he found a way to make money on Shabbos? This is a real Yiddish Kopf, you'd say. He realized that if he became a sort of agent that sent other bands out to work, then he didn't have to work Saturday, and he could make more money than most people made in the whole week just
I
from
didn't
Saturday
realize
nights.
yeah, he was an observer in that respect,
Oh, yeah.
but I met Simon in New York. I met Simon. John took me to the Vanguard to hear Ira, and I met Ira. This is funny to me. I met Ira at the Vanguard. I'm there. They're playing. It's great. The end. That night. The next day, and I'm sure you remember. Remember when they used to have music on 52nd Street? They called it the 52nd Street Fair, and they'd have music up and down the street on 52nd Street,
Yeah, it was like one day, 2 days, one weekend
like a
of the
Sunday.
year. Yeah, it wasn't.
So I'm standing. I don't know who was playing. It didn't even matter. I'm standing in the middle of the street, and I hear somebody go, "Nicole, Nicole." And I'm like, who would be calling me? I turn around. It's Ira. I had just met him. That was an amazing thing about Ira was his memory. He had a photographic memory. He could look at a piece of music, play through it once, and know it like better than somebody who's sitting and reading it. and he
Yeah, that
learned.
also worked with Bible passages, right? Yeah, that in scripture. You know,
But that was amazing to me. He remembered people's names. He remembered details about people, everybody he met. He made everybody that he met or he knew feel like they were old friends.
he
And
did have quality.
that was amazing to me. So, so we talked and, I said hello and I was like, how do you remember me? I just met you. You're in a club and, but so then I moved to Florida and he was playing at the, which I was just at the other night. They did a bass tribute to Mingus and Paul Chambers, and I sang a Jeannie Lee song, and I did Sounds of Love.
Duke Ellington, Sound of Love.
Yeah,
Make
so
this
with a
tune.
bunch of bass players, no other instruments, just bass. It was
Oh,
interesting. It was fun. So, but anyway, that church, which the Unitarian Universal.
right, which now is on a street called Ira Sullivan Way.
Yes.
Named that street now. After
Yep.
Ira.
Yep. Well, when I was there, coming from New York and, the club scene and the serious musicians and then I go there and there's people with bean bags thrown all over the floor and they're dancing like this.
Right, yes.
I'm like, what is this? That was my
1970s movie. Yeah.
Woo! That was different. But Ira was playing there. If Joe DiOrio had left, yeah, I think he went out west. So I got there right after he.
Oh,
And Steve Bagby, I think, was playing. John was playing, but
Tony
yeah,
Castellano probably was there. He was off.
maybe.
Continuing our special birthday tribute, I guess what they call on Facebook, Heavenly Birthday, to our dear friend Ira Sullivan. I always still refer to Ira as my teacher, my mentor, and I've had a few, but Ira was really the first one to take me under his wing and teach me about music and life and all of the things that went with knowing Ira, wonderful things he brought to people's lives. On that note, we've been celebrating Ira with a number of the people that knew Ira, that his family, his friends, his musicians that knew him and played with him. And I have a very special guest. Among our guests is my sister, Joy Mover. Joy is a very fine vocalist and singer-songwriter, and these days also doing some stuff with visual art, with photographs and a kind of photographing painting technique, that a videography technique that I don't know the name of it. She'll tell us. Anyway, Joy has been around most of my life. I'm 2.5 years older than Joy, or 3 years. And from the time we were children, we made music together. And we had a very unusual childhood, I would say. I guess most people would say that. Joy will fill you in on that, or we'll fill you in a little bit on that. And Ira was a very important part of our upbringing. First of all, I'd like to welcome my sister, Joy Mover. Hi, Joy.
Hey, Bob. It's great to see you.
Likewise. Wonderful.
Thank you. Especially to discuss, I guess it really was and it always will be my favorite person on the planet.
Really? That's that's something to he's definitely one of mine too. And maybe if it came down to he's definitely right up there. I can't think of anybody who was more my favorite than Ira. So there is something in that. Fill us in on, your reasoning behind making a statement like that. How do you come to that?
Well, Well, I was daddy's little girl, our dad's little girl. And when our dad left, I was daddy's little girl without a daddy. I was like that. I was kind of lost without dad. And I was very, depressed, I guess you could call it. So Ira, first of all, as a musician, as the first experience I had of him was through the music. I went to hear him with you at concerts and things we used to go to, even as a kid. I was going to the Baker's Dozen in Miami and some concerts that he would be playing in. But my point is that as far as him being my favorite person was that I don't know what I would have done in life without him. Like he made so much of a indelible imprint on my soul as a musician, as a human being, as a daughter, because in many ways I really believe like he adopted me. I was like I'm sure he, there were probably others that he did the same, but he was like my spiritual savior in a way, because I don't know, he was so warm and generous and loving as a child. Like I was so in need of that. And he recognized that. And I remember going to their house and hanging out with Leslie and staying over and
When they
he
were
would
up in
come home.
Dania, when they lived next to the cemetery in Dania, right?
Exactly. They
I
lived
was
in
up there.
Dania.
We would go up there and see him. And you were, just to get ages straight, when we would do that, I was around 14, 15, and you were around 12, right in
Yeah.
that range, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And Leslie and you are virtually the same age. Leslie's now called Sonny.
Sonny. Yeah.
So,
Well, you're kidding.
so Sonny was, and you were the same age. And, she told me a funny thing. She says, when I would play with Joy, Joy's idea of playing together was we would sit in the cemetery and rehearse Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross tunes. And then she'd say, Leslie, you're singing my parts. Stay on your own parts. And she said, that was your sister's idea of playing. Other girls were playing with dolls and doing these kind of things. And she said, your sister had us rehearsing Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. I said, that's funny because I turned her on to Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And you and I
Bobby, yeah.
sing a song of Basie record, and you could
The
sing
whole thing.
the record of Jackie McLean with Freddie Red doing the connection.
Absolutely.
When you were like 11, I was like 13. We sang that every tune on the record,
Every note.
record, every note we sang in unison.
We
I
did.
love the record. So, but anyway, I do remember when we would go and visit Ira and Leslie, Charlene and Sonny when you were a child. So go ahead with that. We would visit.
Yeah, so I was maybe 11 and we'd be there. And first of all, Sonny, Leslie, oh my God, the generosity of spirit, okay, in that household. Ira, mom had a generous spirit, beautiful, generous spirit. And there were very few people like that I've ever met.
Oh no, I had that.
Not very few people have that.
Yeah, she had a lot of problems, but she had that.
She had generosity of spirit, and she would have given you anything, and Sonny was the same way like that. She would give you, she was the most generous person. I mean, just not materially, so, but she would. I mean, oh, I like your sweater. Would you like it? I mean, she was just like, no, Sonny, no, I like it on you. It's beautiful. She's such a beautiful soul. I miss her so much. And, unfortunately, we're not as close as I wish we were, but anyway, maybe we will be again. But in those years, so she, Ira used to come home from his gigs at like 3, 4 in the morning, and we'd wake up and he would be making us hot chocolate, and we'd sit there and he would give us, like it was just an amazing, I just loved being there. I loved being.
You could stay over without me. In other words, I would go elsewhere. I didn't stay over at Ira's house.
No. Because she was a girl, we were the same age, so I could stay over, and and I got to appreciate Ira in his own domain, with his family, and I don't know, like I just felt like there was such a beautiful spiritual connection between them. And our family unfortunately had been divided and was completely dysfunctional at that point in time. And like, and the fact that they were so simple, you know, like here we were living, you know, well, we had been living on Miami Beach and blah, 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 you know, just that says enough in itself. They were in Dania in this little house with like, you know, nothing. I mean, they had practically like, it was very, very, she did everything like from scratch, everything. And I was just
Charlene,
amazed.
that's what we were going to say.
Charlene,
Charlene,
yeah. And Charlene, oh my God, the talent of Charlene is breathtaking. She paints as well, honest to God, Bobby, as Rembrandt. I mean, I have been so, I mean, that's why when you say I dabble, well, you know, I come to art from a completely different place, not there. I wish to God I had inherited some of that DNA, but her magic on a canvas is breathtaking. And the detail, like Michelangelo, like that level, I mean, phenomenal. So anyway, Charlene, I always said to her, like, don't you want to like put your stuff out there? She was always doing commissions for the church, you know, I mean, okay. But anyway, so that was her, you know, that was her mission in life, to paint for the church.
poetry is very nice too. Charlene is
Oh my God.
an accomplished poet and really
She's
good
amazing.
one.
She's truly amazing. And her, again, her spirit. But Ira, you know, so there was a rapport with Ira. Like we had a similar paradigm. I don't understand it really, but we always kind of like, you know, I could like to be honest, I mean, as much as I always loved Dad, we didn't have a great rapport. You know, it wasn't like a really easygoing kind of rapport. But Ira had, you know, he had the ability to listen and to hear and be present. And, you know, those qualities were so valuable to me as a child.
That was something I got from Ira too, the idea to always be there, to be present in whatever situation he was in. And that was where the music came from too. The thing that Ira was
Totally.
always 100% there on the bandstand. You
Totally.
know, our father, the joke I always have about our dad, Jim Mover, was even, and he had his beauty too.
He did, absolutely.
But I always used to say uh, that they say no man is an island, but Jimmy Mover was an island, you know. And, you know, Ira was more like a planet.
Right,
know,
right. You
a
know,
wonderfully warm and accessible planet that you could go visit Planet Ira and get all these goodies like the Wizard of Oz, you know, like all of a sudden
totally,
in Ira
totally.
land. And, you know, we didn't have a dad land. We had the island of dad. And that was,
Exactly.
he wasn't abusive or anything. He was a good guy, but he
threw
didn't
me
know
off
how.
a piano bench once, you know.
What's that?
He threw me off a piano bench once. He was very impatient. I mean, he did it with love. I mean, I'm saying, but he was like, when you didn't get it right, off you went, you know, like that was my experience with the piano. That's why I'm such an accomplished pianist. I can blame him for that. But I honestly feel if I really was meant to be a pianist, I would have, you know, it would have happened. But as it turned out, because I couldn't play really anything else as well as that, I sang, you know, I mean, I had mom's voice, I had grandpa, you know, I got that, I had my voice, you know, so I was an instrument. Like I didn't want to be a vocalist because vocalists didn't get to really sing, like improvise. You know, I really wanted to be an instrument. You know, I wanted to be able to express myself through an instrument more so because I liked the value that the instrumentalist gave to the music versus just doing a melody and but you know, Ella and Sarah were exceptions, and certainly there were others and have been other great improvisers. But
You know,
in general,
anyway, to get back to Ira, I mean, our father too. One thing is, I'm a very bad sight reader because I had the same experience with him before I played saxophone. When I was trying to play trumpet as a kid, and Dad could sight read the circus. He was a lead player, and he really understood that, how to read and be technical. But when I didn't get it right, when I make the same mistake 2 or 3 times, that was it in a row. That was, later on, Ira showed me how not to read, but how you could still play in a section. But that's another story. But anyway, let's just say that Ira was infinitely patient with those people, and it was done with so much love. And that was not the way it was brought home to us at home.
No, it was not. No. So it was just such an amazing, the non-judgmental he brought a completely different paradigm to my to my world, you know, and that paradigm altered my life. It really sustained me throughout my life. I feel like he was like our guardian angel, you know, like in a way, like he appeared and he was always there when we really needed him, you know, and he was always there throughout my life.
Well,
You know,
one thing we might mention in that sense is we should tell the story of how we got evicted so many times because our mother, poor mom, was not really capable of working, or she lived in her kind of own little fantasy world in which she was a queen, and everything kind of revolved around her kingdom. And unfortunately, that didn't include making money. So I had my little job in a grocery store and did stuff like that, but that didn't really pay the rent. And Dad sent a modicum of money, you know, but not really enough to get us by. And so we got evicted. For a while, Mom had a boyfriend named Bernie, and Bernie did okay. He was a racetrack gambler. And when we did well, we lived like, we had like a suite at the Singapore hotel in Miami, and we'd be sending for room service with inviting our friends over after school and saying on the phone to room service, yes, please, 6 lemonades with the carbonated water. Thank you. You know, the pink lemonade. Yes, the pink one. And you know, and those wonderful brownies that you have. Yes, bring us a couple of those. And we'd be like that. And then we'd find out that we couldn't pay, that we'd have to get out in the middle of the night. Remember that? And because Bernie had lost at the track. So now we were broke and we had to leave. And we live in some place until we couldn't pay the rent anymore. And we get evicted from that. And so this was constant. You know, and meanwhile, I was hanging out with Ira, going to every gig I could. He had started to play at the Rancher, and I'd be there on my bicycle and sneak in and listen to him every night. And you would be, you know, we're hanging with them too. And finally, we got to a point where we had nowhere to go. And that's when the house in the Southwest, might I say, very strangely enough, off of Bird Road, the nearest main drag to the house that we lived in.
you know, I never put that together ever.
And where Ira presently lives, which I won't give, not Ira presently lives everywhere, but Charlene and Sonny live in that neighborhood, let's say. And, you know, Bird Road is a big stretch, so I'm not giving out their address. But that was so funny because when I told people I grew up didn't grow up, but I spent time, one of the places I grew up, and where my sister and brother grew up much more than I, because I had already left much of the time. But
I'd put it more like doing time than spending time.
Doing time, yes, with Mom.
But that was the lowest point of our lives. Let's just face it. That was the lowest point. Okay, because
our mother was at the peak of her psychotic.
But we had been abandoned by our grandparents.
Right, that too. But we won't get into that.
But right.
But the idea is, yeah. So we were alone in the world with no place to go and no money. And Ira had inherited his parents' house. They had both passed away and ascended. And Ira had a home in Dania, which was where he lived with Charlene and Sonny, and now 2 boys, Brev and Brogan, who were just babies at the time. And Ira said, I think I've got a solution to your your place to live problems. And you can go ahead from there, Joy. Tell us what
okay, so I think we moved there. I had started 9th grade on Miami Beach, but we moved in like November of that year of my 9th grade. I think it was 1969. And so from that time forward, he never raised the rent on Mom, not once. And he was the landlord. He became our landlord. So when we moved there, he would be the one that came and trimmed the trees and mowed the lawn. And
he liked landscaping. He even made living at that. Sometimes when he didn't make enough money, when the Rancher ended and everything, Ira would take landscaping jobs and
he loved trees. I mean, he was so artful with his. There is a word for what that is, arbiter, whatever it is. But he could cut a tree. He knew exactly how to cut a tree. I mean, it's really actually very complicated. You know, trees are, you got to cut them the right way. You got to trim it the right way and all of that. But he was so into the earth. I mean, that was the other part about him. It was so amazing. So like at that time, when I came back later like after I graduated high school, I came back home and lived there for a couple of years, and I had bought a horse. Well, mom had bought the horse for me. That's a whole story in itself. But the point being that because I didn't meet the horse before she bought the horse, just so you know, that was not something that I actually willfully wanted, said, Mom, I want the horse. No, she had bought a horse for me.
Also, to make that a little clearer, we were very poor. How could we buy a horse?
Good question.
Mom, some kind of investments, right? And with the little money she had, we don't quite know how, but next thing you knew, we weren't completely poor, which led to like one of the funniest arguments I ever heard a landlord and a tenant have. I remember overhearing Ira was over, and, doing something in the yard, or he'd come over just to, and to hang. But he's saying to Barbara, he said to my mother, he'd say, look, she says, Ira, I'm doing better now. And I think you can raise the rent. We're okay. We can handle a little bit more each month, please. We're paying this low rent. We can go up. We can do that. And Ira says, Bobby, I was thinking of actually lowering the rent because I'm doing a little better. And, I was thinking that I might lower it. And she says, no, I want you to raise it. And so it was funny because they're at the opposite end of the usual argument. The landlord wants to lower the rent and the tenant wants to raise the rent. What's wrong or what's right with this picture? I thought
I mean, it's like, who does that?
Welcome. And in this podcast is part of a series where we're paying tribute to a man who mentored a lot of us. And we had deep friendships with the great Ira Sullivan, who passed away from us in 2020. And his birthday would be made on May 1st. And I think he would be 93 or 94. I think he was born in 1931, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, we're very fortunate to have two cats that shared quite a lot of experiences with Ira and are wonderful musicians themselves and both renowned in the world for what they do. We have pianist Gary Guile. Hi, Gary.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And wonderful bassist Jay Anderson.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
My pleasure. And, Jay and Gary are most noted in their association with Ira for being part of the quintet with the great Red Rodney, which lasted for several years. What, 4 or 5 years you guys were playing together? And
I was actually with Red for 13 years.
you were with Red for that long, and Ira was, how long was Ira?
Jay, would you say 4 years with Ira? 4 or 5?
Something makes me feel like it's maybe a little longer than that, but Gary was playing with Red and Ira a couple of years before I joined. And then I guess we were together, let's say 5 years.
Right. Who was the bass player before Jay? It was
Paul Berner.
Paul Berner was the bass player, and Tom Whaley was on drums. And then came, after Tom Whaley, Steve Bagby, that was Ira's friend from Florida. You probably knew Steve.
Yeah, very well. And
Yeah.
The other drummer, Joey Barron, do it for a while.
That came later. After Steve Bagby, as Jay pointed out to me, it was Jeff Hirschfield. And
Right, Jeff Hirschfield, that's right, who moved to Amsterdam last time he moved over to Europe, I think.
No, Jeff never moved. He lives in Manhattan.
Building. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then after Jeff came Joey Barron.
right.
Mhm.
But you guys were together, the two of you, for a good 4 or 5 years or longer.
Yeah. Gary
Yeah.
was already there, and when I joined.
So how did Ira come about to In other words, you guys had known, at least Gary had been playing with Red even before Ira joined up with you, right? You were.
Yeah, it went like this, Bob, is that I was gigging in Bermuda. I had taken Kenny Werner's place, and different acts would come down when I was very young. And a trumpet player that also lived in Manhattan Plaza, his name was Jerry LaFern. He was a lead trumpet player and also an orchestrator for Don Costa. And he came down with Frank, I think Frankie Avalon. And we became friendly. He was just there. And he said, look me up when you come to New York. Well, it turned out that we lived in the same building at Manhattan Plaza. And he started a band with Charlie Persip, the big band, a big band. And it was called the Super Band. And it was the first band for Charlie Persip. And it was with the Jerry LaFern, Charlie Persip Super Band. And I was in that because of my association with Jerry. He kind of got me on it. And so I was in that band for a long time with Charlie Persip.
What did Jerry play?
Jerry was a lead trumpet player, not a jazz player, but he was also kind of an orchestrator and copyist for some albums of Barbra Streisand and stuff like that. And so anyway, he was good friends with Red from the Philly days. And
Right.
so Red was actually in prison, and he got out of prison, and he came down, and we were playing at a club called Syncopation with Charlie Persip. And that's where I met Red. He sat in with the band. And then Jerry later told me, he goes, Red is looking to get back on the scene. He's been away and all this kind of stuff. And you guys could work out. So Red and I hooked up and we became kind of very good friends. And I did his first gig with him at the club Crawdaddies in the Roosevelt Hotel, which is now, by the way, where all the immigrants are. But it was a very nice hotel back then, and it was a 6-week gig, 5 nights. But Red had to be in by 8 o'clock because he was in a halfway house because he was still considered in jail. And so that was the beginning days of trying to put a band together and all that. So then he said, well, get a bass player. And I got this guy, Jack Dryden, who was on the band. And then we got Billy Mitchell, the tenor player from Basie's band.
I remember Billy. Yeah, I knew Billy.
Yeah, and then that was almost a
He
year.
used to play a lot at Sonny's place out in Seaford, Long Island. Billy was always there.
Exactly. And so that went on a year with Red. And then when that ended, it was Red who said to me, look, I'm going to get this guy up from Florida, Ira Sullivan. So Red and I had a band with Billy Mitchell for a year. And Tom Whaley was on drums. And then he said, I'm going to get this guy, Ira Sullivan, up. And then that was the beginning of it.
Billy was not the easiest personality to deal with. Billy was a trip and a half.
He was, and it didn't really, he and Red bumped heads.
Well, Billy, it was easy to bump heads with Billy.
Yeah.
But he was a beautiful cat in his way.
Bob, I got a great last gig with Billy, though, with Red. And it was, I don't know if it was the last one, but it was at the Vanguard. And he had a piano player that he played with in Long Island, and they were kind of a team, So it was a Sunday night at the Vanguard, and this guy, I can't remember his name, but he came in, good piano player. And I said to him, would you like to sit in? And this was Billy's piano player. So I was just being a gentleman. He goes, yeah, I would love to. That was like the second set, right? So after the second set, he comes back off. Yeah, nice like that. And Billy Mitchell screams on my ass. He goes, there's no sitting in this band, man. And I said, this is your good buddy. This is your friend. And it was Sunday night. He goes, this is a band. And if that's what you want to do, jam session, you can't do this kind of shit. I said, okay, I'll never let anybody sit in again. We go up on the third set. And he calls every tenor player in the club to come up and sit in. And then he calls Inner Urge and plays about 20 minutes himself. And then after that, he packs up his horn and he leaves me with 25 tenor players ready to play Inner Urge. And that was it.
That's a hard tune too, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
25 tenor players, I bet 3 of them made the changes.
exactly.
I think, I know that's funny. When I met Billy, he came up to Montreal. I was living in Montreal, and Don Schlitten had given him my number to call me because he didn't know anybody there. He came up with his wife, and they had this Cadillac that talked. It said, "Your door is ajar," and he was very impressed with that. That is, listen to my car talk. You see, this is in. You got to think about investing. He would tell me, whatever money you're making, be sure you invest it. I became a rich man, and he was telling me all about by using your money wisely and not spending it on stupid things. Anyway, he was. But I'll tell you, I was listening to him recently on Thad Jones's first record, or one of the first records that Thad made when he was still in Detroit. And they do April in Paris, and they do If I Love Again. And I mean, and Billy plays so nice on it. He was. In fact, one of the reasons I think that when I was 13 in Miami, the Jackie Gleason show used to be filmed there, and I had friends whose fathers were writers on the show, so I got into that show to watch it free. I mean, like to be a part of the studio audience, and was especially excited when Count Basie's band came on and played. And I still, how you have these childhood memories, things that might have made you want to be a musician just subliminally. I remember Billy Mitchell walking up to that microphone with Basie's band with patent leather shoes that were so shiny that even though I probably couldn't, I could imagine that I could see my reflection in them. That he had the hippest shoes. He was just dressed so sharp with those beautiful shiny shoes and played a beautiful solo with Basie's band. That was my first and strongest impression of Billy, But so Ira, I should go back to the story. So Ira's got to send this from this cat in Florida, who he knew years ago. Now you hadn't really probably known much about Ira at this time.
To be honest, I knew who he was, but I can't say I was a fan yet or anything. I just knew that he was supposedly a freak of nature, from what Red said. Red really looked up to him.
Yeah, and Red didn't look up to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, he actually looked up to everybody because he was short.
Because of his height. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. I saw that one come. Yeah. So
the unusual thing was, like, our first gig was the very first night was live at the Village Vanguard, a record for Muse. And I could tell Ira was, we were all really nervous in a weird way because it was like not much rehearsal and it was making a record because it was his big comeback. But he was also living with me. So I met this guy for the first time, and then here I am with him. Jake knows where that went. And there he was staying with me, like, okay, Mr. Sullivan, you're now my guest. And it was an odd, existence, having him moving in, especially I was living with a lady at the time. And that was, interesting. So we did like a year, and then we lured Jay to come and join the band, basically.
How'd the record go?
It wasn't that bad, It wasn't that bad. There was a couple other ones that came out later that really weren't so good because they were almost like jam sessions or something. But, Joe Fields would try to get 12 records to come out of one night of recording.
Be good, yeah.
Yeah.
That was Muse.
Yeah. Jay, do you want to say a little bit about your beginning with it at all? I mean, like, what you were with Carmen McRae at the time, right?
Yeah, you and I would come to New York to play with Carmen, or usually it would be for about 3 weeks. And I was staying at that building with Hirschfield and Tom Whaley and Birch Johnson, 440 10th Avenue. And there would be sessions all the time. And Gary and I played a lot of those sessions together and really kind of musically and personally hit it off. And they were making a change or just whatever. They asked me to join the band, and I was living in Long Beach, California still. And the first year I was kind of commuting back and forth. How that wouldn't happen now, but And it was great because, you know, I didn't have a pad in New York, so Ira would be staying in Gary's apartment usually, but then there were other times when Gary had a rehearsal studio at a place called Breton Hall, and it had like a piano and a little kitchenette. I don't even think it had a chair.
Well, 86th and Broadway. A lot of cats lived in that
Yeah.
place. That was like,
Session there all night long.
you know, Benny
So
Green, piano player, Steve
Yeah.
Hall, Glenn Hall, the baritone player, and Charles Tellerand.
Glenn Wilson. Was it Glenn Wilson or?
Glenn Wilson. I'm sorry, not Glenn Hall. Glenn Wilson.
Gary Haas.
Right.
And
So
who
I
else?
I would be in this one room with Ira, and Gary can tell you much better than I. Nobody has experienced Ira at that level. But I mean, did you ever go to bed before the sunrise, Gary, when Ira was at your pad?
No, Bob, he would like, we would play at the Vanguard and he'd come back and it would be where we rehearsed. We start playing again. And then I would say, man, you got to stop. My neighbors are going to go. And I said, man, it's like 5 a.m. and my lady's got to get up to work in the hospital. She's a nurse. And so like, he goes, yeah, you're young. You go to bed. I'll wait for you. And he would sit in his clothes and just sit on the couch with the mute on and fingering the horn like until about 11 in the morning when I'd wake up. And as soon as I wake up, he'd say, get Jay over here. We're playing. And we would play right up to the Vanguard and then go to the Vanguard and keep it going. So every night at the Vanguard was like our third set. Our first set was already like the third set. Yeah.
Yeah, I know he just loved to play, and and he would.
And
Yeah, tell stories. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, I was going to ask Gary earlier, and then you went ahead and asked him if he had heard of Ira, because to me he was kind of a man of mystery, and I actually had that first record of his where he's a little boy with the trumpet.
Horizon.
That was not his first record. That was a
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was like
the
it was
one
on
on
Made You
Horizon.
Later. Right.
Ira Sullivan. Yeah.
Right. And Jaco Pastorius, I believe, was on that record, and I bought it because of Jaco.
No, Jaco is as I recall, not on that record. Joe DiOrio's on it, and I mean, Jaco was playing with him around that time, but I know the record pretty well.
Okay, it said Jaco acoustic bass, acoustic electric. This is something acoustic bass guitar or something. So I could be wrong.
I'll look at it again. But anyway,
but I knew of his legacy with Jaco, so I got the record, and so that's how I knew of Ira. And then of course we all got a quick education at just his genius and how you know, all the instruments and all the you know, he wasn't locked into any one style. He could play bebop or free music, and you know, I think for both Gary and I, that Ira more than anyone kind of set us on this trajectory in our musical lives of just being open to a lot of stuff, you know, and styles, and I think sometimes it drove Red nuts, you know, because that wasn't necessarily his propensity to play free for a half hour, you know, but for Ira it was like that was as natural as anything, you know. And then we'd go into tune up and then Speak Like a Child, and you know, a million tunes. And he actually put us on the spot at the Vanguard, knowing that Gary and I did not know certain tunes, you know. I remember when he went into Portrait of Jenny, and I had never heard it, you know, maybe on a Sinatra record or something.
right. There was a Clifford Brown with Strings record that was kind of famous. Which I'm
he
sure
kinda,
got you to listen to it.
yeah, he kind of dug that, you know, just putting us on the spot and seeing how we fared, you know. And usually we did okay.